When the final whistle blew, it wasn't just the end of a match, it was the end of something bigger. 8-2, Bayern Munich hadn't just humiliated Barcelona, they had shattered their identity. The scoreboard didn't just read a number, it screamed a legacy collapsing. Inside the dressing room at Estadio da Luz, silence echoed louder than any chant ever had. No one spoke, not even the veterans. Some players sat with their heads buried in towels. Others just stared blankly at the floor. But Lionel Messi didn't sit. He stood, motionless, still in full kit, as if trying to delay the reality that the game had ended. He looked around, then slowly pulled the captain's armband off his arm. His eyes met no one's until they did. Across the room, Gerard Piqué was pacing, not frantic, not panicked, just uncomfortable. He sensed the moment before it happened. Messi walked over. Not fast, not slow, just intentional. "You called yourself a leader," he said, not yelling, not whispering, just cutting. "Then lead us out of this." Piqué didn't answer. His face didn't flinch, but something inside him cracked. He had been at the club nearly as long as Messi. They had celebrated Champions Leagues, La Liga's Club World Cup side by side. But now, there was space between them, not physical, not verbal, a distance built out of blame, disappointment, and unspoken truths. Messi turned and grabbed his phone. He wasn't checking messages, he was scrolling headlines. Worst loss in club history. Barca humiliated. Messi for now game. He put the phone down. 8 goals, he repeated. "We didn't just lose, we gave up." Piqué finally responded. "We weren't prepared." Messi looked at him sharply. "And whose fault is that?" No answer. And in that moment, the air in the room changed. Not just between two legends, but between a team that once ruled the world, and one that no longer knew who they were. The tension in the room didn't come from raised voices. It came from everything that wasn't said. For years, Messi and Piqué had coexisted under the same crest, Barcelona's silent icons. But now, silence had turned from comfort to conflict. That's the other players filtered out. One by one, only a few remained: Ter Stegen, Busquets, and a staff member pretending to check gear. But their ears were on the conversation. Piqué sat down, finally. His voice was quieter this time. "You think this is all on me?" Messi didn't blink. "I think you let it slide. I think you saw this coming and chose to stay quiet." Piqué leaned back. "And what did you do?" That landed, because Messi, for all his magic on the pitch, had often avoided the boardroom politics. He had spoken with his feet, not his voice. But now that silence had cost them everything. "I didn't think I had to babysit the defense," Messi replied. "I thought we were a team." There was history in that statement. Because this wasn't about one game, it never is. This was about years of slow erosion. The Neymar departure, the failed replacements, the dressing room losing trust in the directors, and most of all, the growing realization that Barcelona's DNA had been stretched to the point of breaking. Piqué stood. "You know what, Leo? You act like you're the only one who cares, but I bled for this club too." Messi nodded slowly, then bleed louder. That line wasn't shouted, but it cut deeper than any yell. Because for Messi, the quiet suffering, the collapse of identity, pride, legacy, was unbearable. And for Piqué, being challenged by the only man he never questioned, felt like betrayal. The media wouldn't hear about this exchange. No camera had captured it. But inside that dim, cold locker room, something irreversible had shifted. To legends, one crest, but suddenly, different futures. The flight back to Barcelona was uneventful on the outside. No one talked, no music played, not even the usual card games, just the low hum of the engines, and unspoken tension between two of the most important players in the club's history. Piqué sat near the front, headphones on, eyes closed but not sleeping. Messi sat further back, scrolling through photos of old victories: Rome 2009, Wembley 2011. He paused on one. Him and Piqué, arms over each other's shoulders, laughing after lifting the Champions League. Now, that image felt like it belonged to another lifetime. The next morning, training was scheduled. No one showed up early. Not Messi, not Piqué, not even Busquets, the silent diplomat. When Messi finally entered the locker room, Piqué was already in the far corner, lacing his boots. For a brief second, they made eye contact. Then, nothing. Coleman entered, clipboard in hand, trying to act like everything was normal, but he wasn't fooling anyone. He divided the groups for drills, attackers and defenders. Messi to one side, Piqué to the other. As they ran drills, the separation was obvious. There were no jokes, no glances, no shared instincts, just two men moving on parallel tracks that used to be one. Later that day, whispers began to circulate among the staff. Did you hear about the locker room argument? I think Messi is done. I heard Piqué might be leaving too. It spread fast, not through press leaks, but through posture, through cold stares and unsaid words. That evening Messi sat alone in his car outside the Ciutat Esportiva. He called someone. It wasn't a teammate, it was his father. Start looking, he said quietly. We may need a way out. On the other side of the city, Piqué had his own conversation. Not with an agent, not with a director, with a journalist. Off the record, there's a storm coming, he said. People think it's about results. It's not. It's about truth, and truth always gets out. And in that moment, the fracture wasn't just personal. It became institutional. Because Barcelona wasn't just losing matches, it was losing its soul. By the end of the week, the press had caught the scent. Rumors evolved into headlines. Messi furious with club leadership. Piqué and Messi in silent feud. Barcelona fracture runs deeper than expected. Still, nothing official came out. No statements, no denials. Just silence, the kind that confirms everything. Inside the club, the corridors were filled with eyes but no voices. Interns, media staff, assistant coaches, they all knew something had shifted. Barcelona wasn't just a football club anymore. It was a quiet battlefield. Joan Laporta had returned to power, and with him came a new plan, or so he said. Privately, he arranged meetings with both Messi and Piqué, but those meetings couldn't have gone more differently. I sat down and asked one question. What are we building? Laporta paused. A future without fear. But Messi wasn't convinced. He wasn't asking for promises. He was asking for identity. And identity, for Leo, was trust. Trust in teammates. Trust in leadership. Trust that loyalty wasn't just being used as leverage. Meanwhile, Piqué had his own meeting. It was more tactical. Salary, role, minutes on the pitch. But Laporta looked tired, not angry, just worn. We need change, Gerard. Piqué nodded. I've heard that before. The problem is, change always comes for the ones who care most. And there it was. 2 meetings, 2 legends. But only one would stay. Messi's camp had started exploring options seriously now. Paris was interested. So was Manchester City. But Leo wasn't chasing money. He was escaping betrayal. And Piqué, he stayed. Not because he was the villain, but because sometimes the ones who remain carry the weight of the ruins. As preseason neared, the locker room atmosphere turned icy. Photos from training showed it all. No smiles, no embraces. Just a team going through the motions, without belief. And in the middle of it stood 2 men, brothers in arms, now ghosts to each other. One preparing to leave, the other clinging to what little remained. But what neither of them knew was that the collapse hadn't ended. It was only beginning. August 8, 2021. The press conference room at Camp Nou was packed, but quiet. No anthem, no cheers, only flashes from 100 cameras and the faint buzz of air conditioning. Messi entered, eyes already red. He wasn't wearing the jersey, just a simple shirt and the look of a man saying goodbye, not by choice, but by necessity. The moment he sat down, the silence cracked. He couldn't speak, not at first. He looked out at the rows of journalists, friends, staff, some of whom had been there since he was a boy. Then he whispered, I didn't want to leave. The room held its breath. What followed wasn't a farewell. It was an autopsy of mismanagement, of broken promises, of a club that had failed its greatest player. And yet, through it all, one absence stood out. Piqué wasn't there, not physically, not in any public message. He posted a tweet, later short, vague, almost corporate. Some fans called it respectful, others called it calculated, because by now, the split was public knowledge. One had left to preserve his identity, the other stayed, to survive in the wreckage. And yet, neither had won. Messi's debut for PSG came weeks later. The shirt was different. The league was different. But when he stepped onto the pitch, something else was gone too. The magic, still there, the goals, still inevitable, but the meaning, that had been buried under the rubble of a collapsed dream. Back in Barcelona, Piqué played on. less minutes, more scrutiny. He began investing in other ventures, media, business, even tennis, but every time he stepped onto the camp, new turf, echoes followed him. Not boos, not cheers, just memories of a time when two boys from La Masia ruled Europe, when goals came with joy, not burden, when football was still pure. In the end, it wasn't a betrayal. It wasn't a fight. It was something worse, a slow drift, a breaking of alignment, not between enemies, but between legacies. Messi and Piqué never needed to hate each other, but they did need to understand one thing: when you carry the same crest, but walk in different directions, eventually, the badge rips in two.